I just want to welcome you. I'm Julie Nowinski. I'm the head of Adult Services here at PAC Memorial Library, and I want to welcome you on behalf of the North Carolina Room Friends of the Library and the North Carolina Room staff to our program tonight, Save Downtown Asheville and the Wrap. This is the first in a series of 6 programs that explore Asheville in the 1980s and the institutions and the people that helped reimagine what the city center might be after some of the big stores fled. And so as we started thinking about doing this series, we had lots of conversations with people who lived here, were born here, raised here, were working here, were moving here in the 80s, and and they were all involved in civic life and social activism and advocacy and in starting new businesses and civic engagement and our memories, and that includes me. I moved here in 1980. Our memories didn't reflect this idea that Asheville was boarded up and just dying. We were all making plans, being active, and looking to the future. So while there were many buildings that were empty and there was much work to be done, it's true that seeing downtown Asheville as the heart of a beautiful city, the idea of that was never abandoned. And so as we got talking about this time, we started realizing that here in the North Carolina Room, which is where we archive some of Asheville's history, we have much more information about the 1880s than the 1980s. So these programs, these 6 programs, are going to help us begin documenting and archiving this time in Asheville's history, because it was a critical turning point where lots of decisions were made that affected the way Asheville is now and what it could have been. So I just want to thank, there's so many people who put their hearts into this and who have donated their time and their expertise. And tonight we have Jan Schochet, Peggy Gardner, Wayne Caldwell, Norm Price, and Larry Holt here. Jan and Wayne and Peggy are our official moderators. And I would also like to thank our friends of the North Carolina Room. They help us make these kind of programs possible with their support. They also support other projects in the North Carolina Room and even equipment needs and things like that. So we are very grateful for their support, and there's information on joining the Friends back on the table if you're interested in doing that and supporting that group who supports us so well. Also, there's information about the next 5 programs on the table in the back there, which will be at the last Wednesday of the month for the next 5 months after this. So I would like, check your cell phones. Please be sure that they're turned off. We appreciate that. And I'm going to turn it over to Jan Schochet. And thank you all for coming. This is very exciting, and it's been a really pleasure.
Hello? Wow. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Well, this is a pretty huge crowd, and first I'd like to thank every single one of you for being here tonight, because you could be many other places, but those of us who lived through this historic period think this is pretty important, and we are honored that those of you who didn't live through this are here. I have a few thank yous myself. Thank you, Julie, the head of PAC Library, for allowing this to happen. Thank you, the staff of the North Carolina Room, who do incredible work, and all of the materials that you're going to see here and hear about tonight. We can only touch upon the highlights of this whole issue, but there's tons more material in the North Carolina Room. Please go and visit. I want to thank the Friends of the North Carolina Room. They're the people who are sponsoring these seminars, and I hope that you go to the other ones. I know that I'll be there, and they are going to be really great learning opportunities. Now, I'm Jan Schochet, and before I tell you anything more about me and introduce the rest of the panelists a little bit more formally, there's something that I always like to do whenever I give a talk like this, a history talk, which is in Asheville, which is to find out exactly who's in this room. So this is just to get into the swing of things, as my third grade teacher, Mrs. Anderson from Ira B. Jones School, used to say. I'm going to ask you a question, and you guys just raise your hand if you fall within that category. Who has moved to Asheville within the last year? I have some friends who haven't raised their hand here. They're sitting right in over there, but yeah, we got a smattering of people. How many people have moved here within the last 5 years? Okay, look around. That's a lot of people. That's probably almost, maybe at least a quarter. How many people have lived in Asheville for 10 years or less, or more? 10 years? 10 years. No, I'm sorry, 10 years or less. You moved here, I'm sorry, 10 years or less. Just a few. So more people have moved here in 5 years. How many people have moved here 20 years ago? Okay, yeah, a lot of people. How many people have moved here 30 years ago? Well, that's pretty many. How many people in this room are natives? Maybe about 45% of the people are natives. Yes. I know, I'm sorry. Between 40 and native. Okay. Okay, we got a lot of people. We've got a lot of people who've been here a long time, and we've got a lot of people who've been here for a short time, which tells me that people who've been here a long time are concerned about our history, and people who are new to town are concerned about our history. And we welcome you for being concerned about our history. I'm going to choke up over that. But anyway, so a little thank you so much for being part of my informal survey. I'm Jan Schochet. I have to say this really quickly. What am I going to say? My family has been here since 1887, not 1987. My father was born here. My grandmother was almost born here. She was about 3 years old when they came from Lithuania. Well, actually, they came from Savannah, where my great-grandfather and his brother spent about 2 years because they had an older brother there. And then they came up to the mountains because health reasons, it was too hot, whatever. They were very prolific. My great-grandfather and his brother, they had lots of children. That would be my grandmother's generation, and they all had stores in downtown Asheville from the 1880s, really until our last store got sold from our family in 2006. So, and this is not my immediate family, but that was my immediate family, but lots of stores during that whole time period. I was a fourth generation person from my family to work in our businesses downtown. My family owned a business at the corner of Patton and South Lexington called the Bootery, and a dancer's place. I ran a dancer's place. Actually, Julie, who introduced me, told me today that when she first moved to Asheville, the first thing she ever bought in Asheville was a pair of boots from the Bootery. So that's pretty cool. And thank you for remembering, because as you know, I meet so many people now and who have no idea about the Bootery or the family name or anything. And I think everybody who's been here a long time sort of feels that. We were so used to just being known from the time we were little, like Leon Rockamora, whose family owned Asheville Showcase, who's sitting up front. He's one of our resource people who will help answer questions at the end. But Asheville's changing, and it's not going to stop changing, and I, for one, welcome it, and thank you all for being here. Let me introduce now to you people who are going to talk. Wayne Caldwell, the man in the blue shirt over there. He's from a little bit west of Asheville, and a little bit west of Candler, and his family, he married into a family who owned Sluter Furniture Company, and he worked there for many years and still is. His sister-in-law owns Ambiance. They sold their buildings downtown a few years ago and moved over to Chestnut Hill, and Wayne has the business office upstairs in Ambiance. So Wayne actually was the president of our organization, Save Downtown Asheville, and that's why he's talking. Peggy Gardner in the white sweater. Peggy is an Asheville native also, and a photographer and an artist and an archivist. And Peggy is talking because as one of the many protests to the idea of a suburban mall being plunked into the middle of Asheville, as unbelievable as that sounds, Peggy formulated a living art process that happened one day called the wrap, and she will explain the wrap to you. We had Norma Price, who was on our city council at the time of this whole brouhaha, and we're so glad she's here. Thank you, Norma. And we also have Larry Holt, who is gonna just raise his hand. Larry asked me today if he should be wearing a black hat up here because Larry worked for the City of Asheville Housing Authority, Redevelopment Commission, and his job, he was doing his job, which was, yes, he's going to explain to you, it's all very complicated. Wayne and Larry will confuse you with all these complicated scenarios of federal laws and money and state laws and money and city and county laws and money. But Larry dealt with the revitalization effort in Asheville and Buncombe County since 1972, right? When he first came to Asheville. That's one other thing I want to point out is that
would you ask the speakers to please stand so that we can all associate a voice with a face?
They're not going to talk. First I'm going to show some slides, then we're going to have a quick scene change, and we're going to have chairs around this table up on a platform, so I think you will be able to see everyone. Is that okay?
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. Those of us who were here back then, there's a bunch of these circulating today. People have brought their own Save Downtown Asheville buttons. Hold your button up or raise your hand if you have a Save Downtown Asheville button. Thank you for clapping. Probably not many people would be in this room tonight if we hadn't Saved Downtown Asheville. I want to point out that the designer of these buttons, Dana Irwin, is here along with Jean Wall Penland. They produced these buttons. We have a lot of people who did a whole lot of work on both sides, and we will mention some of them shortly. I'm going to start, if we can have the lights come down, I'm going to start sort of a PowerPoint style presentation and give you a little bit of background. Visual background. That strobe light's gonna drive me crazy. Okay, thank you, sir. Save Downtown Asheville. This is a picture of downtown Asheville, Patton Avenue, looking up toward Vance Monument in 1927. As you can see, it's pretty crowded. The streets, there's no empty blocks for parking lots. This is a bustling city, downtown Asheville. Let me figure out how to get to the next one. Very quick history. The population of Asheville in 1880, before the train arrived, the train arrived in 1880. Before the train arrived, there were 2,400 people in Asheville. The decade between 1880 and 1890, in 1890, 10 years later, there were 12,400. So it went from 2,400 to 12,400 in 10 years. Why did people arrive? People arrived, well, why did you arrive? It's really beautiful. The mountains are here. They arrived because their doctor sent them for the fresh mountain air, which was a curative for all kinds of diseases, mostly lung disease and tuberculosis. And they arrived because they might have already had family members here who had come because of the health. And they also came because there was a very, very good opportunity for business. It was a small place, wasn't very populated, and there was a good opportunity for a bustling, booming town for people to arrive in. This was around 1890. We had, the town grew, but another big influx of people came. The GIs right after World War II came and opened a lot of businesses downtown because they had money from the GI Bill, and there was a lot of opportunity at that point. So it was really a very bustling city from around 1890 or 1900 until around throughout the 50s and 60s when I was growing up. Everything was downtown. Can we hold our questions till the end? Is that okay? Okay, thank you. This is the Langren Hotel. This is where the parking building used to be on the corner of College and Broadway. This is about in the 1920s. This is some big event, but you can see there's cars. Oh, look, I have a laser pointer that my friend Ellen brought me. There are cars, people all the way down here and all the way up on College. This is Broadway. This is in the 1920s. Just to show you, the Langren Hotel was built in 1913, and it was a centerpiece of town. Just to show you the difference, let me just go back. I'm going to show you, this next slide is if you were standing right here looking north towards North Asheville. And this is 50 years later in the 1970s. Not many cars, not many people, although you can see Slurter Furniture right here. Lane's family's business was right there. This is Patton Avenue from about Farmburger looking west, and you can see there are a lot of people on this painted postcard right here in front of what's now the Lobster Trap and Cress, and then this whole building where the Mann store is down, that got torn down in 1980. But this is 1946, 47. 30 years later, half a block down, it looks like this. Not too many people, not too much going on. The city center was, for all those years, it was where everything happened. The service businesses, whether it was your doctors, your lawyers, your insurance people, all the commerce was pretty much mostly in downtown Asheville. There was some in West Asheville, and there was a little bit, out in every direction, but it was a very bustling city. Until, as in most cities in the late 60s and early 70s, we got mauled. And pretty much every city had a mall, and pretty much every mall drained away an awful lot of businesses from the downtowns, and many downtowns still have not recuperated. Mostly only the chain stores could afford to go there because the rents were very high, so some of the pretty much all the smaller mom and pop businesses stayed in downtown. Most of those GIs around the middle to late 70s, they had been in business for 30, 35 years, and their kids didn't want to work that hard. They wanted to be professionals most of the time. So they just closed up shop. And some stayed, like Wayne was the next generation, so he got involved in his business. I was the next generation, I got involved in my business. My parents worked well into their 80s. But we did get mauled. And you know what? If you can't beat them, well, you're just going to have to join them. So in March of 1980, a giant downtown complex was proposed, which included a hotel and a mall. And I'm going to back up for like 1 minute and just tell you that 2 years before, in January, one of the city planners made a presentation in the upstairs meeting room at the Civic Center right over there, which was, this was all across the country, and everybody wanted revitalization. And how are we going to revitalize our downtown? And everybody was worried about this all the time. And one city planner, Richard Thornton, gave this incredible presentation that knocked the socks off of everyone. I think most people were stunned and didn't know how to deal with it. But it basically was, renovate the buildings that are here. It's just like in Europe, have different neighborhoods, whether it's the Wall Street neighborhood, the Lexington neighborhood, the Square neighborhood, have banners announcing it, and have outdoor cafes, which did not exist at that time. And of course, I have always been a preservationist. I loved it, and I think a lot of people did, but no one really knew how that was going to happen. So nothing did happen, and because of that, this is what was really presented to Asheville as a solution, and it did seem to many people that it was a solution. However, this is the map of what the area was right here, and I'm going to read you these streets. This is Broadway, And this goes down to Hiawassee Street, and it goes up to Rankin Avenue, then it turns up College Street and goes, Walnut, yes, Walnut, goes along Haywood Street, comes back down College Street, takes in a little bit of Patton Avenue, kind of next to the Crest building, in between Crest and Wachovia, comes back up to Broadway from College Street. This is 11 square blocks of downtown that was going to be leveled flat with a suburban mall put in the middle of it. And personally, for me, the architecture of old buildings versus the architecture of the mall, that was my main reason. My building was not in the middle of all that, but I hated the idea of losing those buildings because I had been to Washington, D.C. and Georgetown, and I was lucky enough to go on a UNC Asheville trip to Oxford, England, and go to the old country and see all these old buildings, and saw that they could be used. But this was not what was going to happen. And I saw a flyer one day, or somebody told me about a group that was uniting to battle the complex. And it was called Save Downtown Asheville. There's Wayne, looking very tired, and me looking very upset that the buildings were going to get torn down. Now, I'm going to run through these slides that I have explaining this fairly quickly because Wayne and Larry and Peggy are going to talk a bit more in detail about the rest of this. But this is just some marketing materials that came out. We didn't call them marketing materials, where they were flyers, is what they were, flyers and ads. We put out, our organization put out, unwanted, Asheville City Council proposes murder of this historic building. Belshare might be celebrated on the rubble heap of our hometown businesses. Two cities, Asheville and Charleston, I think this was Charleston, South Carolina, Larry, it was
West Virginia.
Charleston, West Virginia, were fighting the convention center, okay. Wayne, looking very intense. But then, and you will hear later how this all came about, it actually, the fate of them all hinged on a vote of the public. The voting public got to vote on this. This literally tore families apart. There were people on all walks of life. Some hated it, some loved it. This was, it says, the Asheville Commercial Center won't cost taxpayers a dime. Vote yes. This was for the group for it, obviously. Building for a Better Asheville. The vote was on November 3rd, 1982. And this was one of our propaganda pieces. The city says it has no money for schools, but yet they want you to raise $42 million this was in bonds, revenue bonds, for you to pay for it. Amazingly enough, this was a 2-year, literally a battle, and there was some in the paper almost every single day about this. And the person who wrote all the articles was Barbara Blake, and she wrote a great long letter to me about that experience, which will be in the North Carolina room. It's really too long for me to read it tonight, but the largest place for people to meet was actually in the First Baptist Church. So it was arranged that there was going to be a town meeting, not too long before the vote. And the town meeting, amazingly, was televised live by WLOS TV because it was still locally owned. That would never happen today. And it was standing room only, just like this, in the church. Let me see. It's possible that I might be turning this, I am turning this over to Wayne right now. So we're gonna take a little, make a little change of scenery while the lights come up. We're gonna arrange the chairs so we can have a little presentation by everyone and a discussion. I'm going to leave Wayne with this map that he can talk about, and we'll talk a little more in a minute. And Wayne Caldwell is going to talk about Save Downtown Asheville.
Thank you. As you can see on this map here, this is the property acquisition map. And if you look right in here.
Can you stand up, please?
Yes. If I stand up, I can't point at the buildings. if you look right here, these 4 buildings right through here is what our family owned on Broadway. And when we learned that the city was interested in taking this by eminent domain if necessary, we took offense at that. We just didn't think that was American or any of that sort of thing. So I remember my mother-in-law looking at me and saying, well, what are you going to do about this? And for those of you who remember Sarah Long, my mother-in-law, you did something about that when she said something. So we decided to have a meeting in our buildings to form something that we called Save Downtown Asheville that night. The mall was announced on May 12th, I think it was, in 1980. We formed Save Downtown Asheville probably the next week. I don't remember the exact date. But we decided to hire a lawyer. We got Robert B. Long Jr., Bob, as he's affectionately known around here. And he helped us incorporate, and we were off and running. And there was, maybe at that first meeting, there were 35 or 40 people. I don't really honestly remember. But you looked at us, and or at least I looked around and put myself in the position, what are these people going to do? You know, can we really fight City Hall? Well, in my better moments, I decided, yeah, we can do this. But then I didn't know that the next year and a half I was going to be scared at some level that my livelihood was going to be gone. Our buildings were going to be bulldozed and all that sort of thing. And it wasn't really until we knew that they were going to have a referendum on it that I relaxed. I just want to read you a couple of things here from a timeline that will show you that this was not an idea that the city just had all of a sudden and didn't do anything about it. They were doing things about it. As a matter of fact, on March 20th of 1980, Council appropriated $9,500 of community development money toward a feasibility study. And Norma, you may remember this. I got up at that council meeting and I was just shaking. I was just, and I asked council if they would give Save Downtown Asheville an equal amount of money to do our own feasibility study on it. And I think it was Ralph Morris who made just a really sarcastic comment about what I said. But of course they didn't do that. On the next week, March 27th, Gene Oxenrider, a former mayor, who was calling himself then the chairman of something called a Committee of 36, never did figure out who those 36 exactly were, but they gave council $20,000 toward this feasibility study. Private money that was coming, I guess, out of people with money's pockets. Say Downtown Asheville didn't have that kind of money. But this Committee of 36 announced itself as ex-Mayor Oxenrider, Claude Ramsey with Axona, Bill Cecil, Ralph Jennings, Sister Mary Veronica Schumacher, Tony Lord. Isn't that ironic? Bill Highsmith, Jack Shuford, George Beverly, and all the presidents of the banks and savings and loans associations downtown. How do you fight that? But we decided we'd try. In April of 1980, it was reported that the Housing Authority would contribute staff time to this project, and I'm sure Larry will say something about that in a little while. Verl Emmerich, who was then the planning director, announced in the paper that 70% of the buildings in this area were blighted. Now, never mind that we had a CO, and never mind that we were doing business in them, and our customers didn't seem like they didn't want to wear hard hats when they came in the building, but that's what Mr. Emmerich said. On April the 10th of 80, Council accepted another $10,000 from the Committee of 36. And then on April 19th, my buddy Peggy Gardner did something about this, and she's going to tell you about the rap that happened. See, and this is just barely a month after the project had been announced. We learned later that Council had known about it since January and hadn't been telling us anything, but sometimes that's what Council does. I'm going to skip to July of '80 when Jim Presley and Bob Anthony sent a letter to council saying that they were very distressed at how slowly the city was proceeding on this project. And we'd like to think at Save Downtown Asheville that we had a little something to do with that lack of progress. Because somebody, either I or somebody in our organization, went to every single council meeting for a year and a half. We went to P&Z. We went to every place that we thought some, as we called them then, corrupt city officials were going to be. And keeping an eye on them was something that was really important. Council, the day after they got this letter from Jim Presley and Bob Anthony, approved the concept of the proposal. This was in July of 1980. And also in that month, about a week later, the Strauss-Greenberg people came to town and unveiled a real, honest plastic model of the proposed mall. And everybody from the committee at 36 was grinning, and they thought this was just a great big nice thing. I looked at it and I thought, this thing looks inside. It looks forbidding from the outside. I wouldn't want to be in there. It's just this mall sitting on top of a parking garage. Not unlike maybe a hotel. No, never mind. Don't get me started on that.
Resembles the library.
But I just want to give you a couple of quotes from Brent Milgram, who was the Strauss-Greenberg representative, the developer. He said, "This is not a mall. It's basically a restoration and renovation of the downtown. We feel the project will emphasize what's good about downtown already. If it wasn't in the middle of town," he said, "it might as well be out in the pasture somewhere." And Jim Hunter, who was chair-elect of the Revitalization Commission, said it wouldn't be called a mall like people would say they were going to the Westland Mall or any other mall. They would be coming to downtown Asheville. He was an accountant. This thing got called all kinds of things. It was an urban service center, it was a downtown service center, it was this, that, and the other. It kept changing identity. In November of 1980, the Planning and Zoning Commission designated the area blighted, and that's one of the things you have to do to establish an urban renewal area, redevelopment area under North Carolina statutes. So it took them from announcement in March to November to get that far with it. In December, the council approved a memorandum of understanding with the Strauss-Greenberg Company, and they appropriated $225,000 toward this feasibility study that they've been talking about doing for 6 months or more. But finally, that was going to get underway. The first part of 1981 was appraising the properties, this, that, and the other. And council finally, in August of '81, decided the project was financially feasible. And then in August 27th of '81, the city resolved to apply for $40 million in general obligation bonds. Now this is really important because they had been wanting to finance this with revenue bonds, which do not require a vote. And I'm not quite sure all of the machinations of that, but somehow the local government commission in Raleigh said, no, you can't do that. We at Save Downtown Asheville had been arguing all along that you can't do this for a commercial project. We didn't know whether you could or not. That's what we were arguing. And it turned out that the local government commission more or less sided with us. And I remember going to Bob Long's office that afternoon after council. And I said, David, I think you might have gone with me at that meeting. And I remember, asking Bob, what are we going to do? And he just kind of grinned. And he said, how loud can you scream? Please don't throw me in the briar patch. Because he said, we're going to have a political campaign here, and it's going to be fun. I didn't know how to run a political campaign, but Bob sure did. And we created very quickly an organization called Taxpayers Against $40 Million Bonds. That had a good ring to it. And we had a board of directors that was mostly people from West Asheville. And, you know, we knew they were going to not, we knew West Asheville would not vote for this. What we didn't want was North Asheville doing that. So we had one person from North Asheville on the board. And we campaigned against this, and that's where you saw some of this nasty propaganda up here that Jan showed you. And then somebody, and I would really like to know whose idea this originally was, decided there ought to be a town meeting. And this is the meeting that Jan described as happening in First Baptist Church. It happened on October 22nd of '81. And I just have to say, I saw Walt Gladding on the street about a week before that meeting. Walt was going to be talking pro-mall. Walt was a banker. He said, "Wayne, how you doing?" I said, "Fine." He said, "Have y'all rehearsed?" And I said, "No." And I just lied. I don't normally lie to people. But when he said, "Good, we haven't either," I took him at his word. And they hadn't, and we had. We salted the audience with questions. We practiced the answers before television cameras and that sort of thing. We had good coaches on this. I even wore makeup. And it was a lot of fun. It was kind of like shooting fish in a barrel, really. But I don't know how much bearing that meeting had on the referendum question next week, or next 2 weeks. But on November 3rd, the bond referendum failed 2-1. All of a sudden, we were back to square one. We'd spent a year and a half, we'd spent a lot of money, everybody'd spent a lot of time and trouble and all like this, and the city hadn't made a bit of progress that anybody, or at least that I could tell. I have to hand it to Mayor Tramp, because very quickly after that, he appointed a mayor's task force on downtown, and he made me sit down with Jim Daniels. He made Save Downtown Asheville people sit down with the pro-mall people and ask the question, what the hell are we going to do now? And that led, I think, to some pretty good decisions by the city, some consulting, doing one thing or another. And I'd like to think that this particular moment in time paved the way for the renaissance that we see now in Asheville.
Thank you, Wayne. I'm going to pass the microphone to Larry Holt, who he's going to be, Wayne's a hard act to follow, Larry. But I have all trust in the world that you're going to do a great job. Thank you for being here.
Guys, it's good to see this crowd. This is what we need in Asheville, folks to show up, and we're glad to have you here. And can you hear me? You're putting your hands up? Okay. And I was going to wear my black hat tonight because I came to Asheville in 1972 to complete and close out the Civic redevelopment project, which is where First Baptist Church, the county buildings, the YMCA, that area, with that redevelopment project, and also work on another one, the East Riverside redevelopment project, which was both of these were conservation and rehab projects, because we did save things. And of the redevelopment programs that we've had in Asheville, we've not had one total clearance. Now this one that we're talking about would have been total clearance in terms of the entire project area. And the process for doing that, and Wayne touched on it a little bit, the General Statutes Urban Renewal Law 160A-500, in case you have trouble getting to sleep at night, look it up and you can read it, has a number of factors. Now the feds came up with the urban renewal concept in the 40s because of the blight in the central city areas. And a lot of this was due, and there was an article in the paper, I guess a couple of months ago, where people were saying that it's interesting that urban renewal projects were the same areas that were redlined. Everybody know what redlining is in terms of mortgages? Back in the 30s and 40s and 50s. And I said, duh, if you don't loan money in areas to rehabilitate and keep property up, it's going to become blighted. And so the Fed stepped in the 60s and 70s with urban renewal to take care of these areas. And some good, some bad. But again, the statute requires, now the Feds allowed the states enabling legislation to create not only housing authorities, but redevelopment commissions. And the state created its own enabling legislation, which would allow municipalities and counties to create housing authorities and redevelopment commissions. Now, these are separate, independent corporate entities. They're not city, they're not state, they're not federal. However, and the commissioners are appointed in North Carolina by the mayor. So 5 commissioners are appointed to handle the redevelopment programs in the state of North Carolina. And of course, that's still in place, but the redevelopment program or urban renewal was incorporated into an overall community development block grant program in the 70s. So redevelopment projects were not totally funded by the federal government except through community development block grants. Have I got you confused now? Okay, moving on down, the state statute is very clear as to what you have to do and prove to have a redevelopment project. Because along with the approval of the project is the use of eminent domain to acquire real estate, which means that property can be taken adversely. The utilities commissions, governmental entities can do this. The railroad and any public utility can use eminent domain. However, with urban renewal, the process is a little different in that not only do the utility companies have what they call a quick take, where they can deposit the money with the court and get board of vesting title and right of possession, put people in the street and move on with the project. Urban renewal law requires that that you've got to go through the process and you do not get order vesting title and right of possession until you've had a hearing to determine price, fair market value, and worked out the details for relocation. So anyway, the process for redevelopment is that the Planning and Zoning Commission has to determine, and by resolution, that 2/3 of the area within the project area is blighted in the terms of the statute. It's very clear as to, and it's fairly broad that in terms of what is blighted. And I think the survey that was made actually was about 75% of the actual structures, because there were a number of them that were not substandard, but a lot of them were, especially the upper floors were actually pigeon roosts, and you can imagine what they were like. So it was, I think the city did a study, and also a private firm, an engineering firm, was contracted to come in and do a more detailed study from the basements to the attics of at least 75% of the buildings in this particular project area. And the Planning and Zoning Commission, by resolution, declared that area as blighted in terms of the state statute. We went to work, we got the instructions from the city to proceed as the redevelopment commission here in Asheville. And to follow up with those studies, work with the planners to come up with a plan, come up with a financing plan. And this is the real key. In terms of the redevelopment plan, it has to have a feasible financial plan. The original concept was to go with revenue bonds, which did not require a referendum. It was basically a done deal until the interest rates went up. Conventional interest rates went up. And in order to make the deal work, it required general obligation bonds. And so I think that the gamble was, the bankers, everybody said, let's do this. Let's do the referendum. And they didn't know these folks were lining up against them. So that really was the key. If conventional interest rates had not gone up, the deal would have gone through with revenue bonds. Fortunately, that didn't happen, and the rest is history. Now, the key thing that Wayne mentioned, following the referendum, Roy Trantham called me and said, you told us what you don't want. What is it do you want? Which, with the organization that they had in place, made this happen. And I think a lot of folks, David, Brown, Wayne, an awful lot of people came to the table and came up with some positive ideas. John Lancius started investing in Lexington Avenue, and the rest is history. It took us a while, but we got here, and it was a year spent in my life in coming up with a plan that I'm very pleased didn't come to pass.
I just want to say as a side note of interest that, where do you live now, Larry?
21 Haywood Street between Woolworths and Urban Outfitters.
I'm going to hand the mic over to Norma Price so that she can talk a little bit about what City Council was thinking around that time.
I'll try to stand and I'll try to be heard since this time of year the voice sometimes goes with the allergies. But I'm really pleased to see as many mixed in a sense of how many have been here, how many are new, and how many have been for a while. It's sort of hard to believe what was in the 1980s if you're recent visitors or recent residents here in Asheville. It's part of it was covered after the mall left, that the downtown was becoming an area that was becoming devalued. The value of the properties downtown were decreasing, making Asheville's residential areas having to pay more. But one of the things that was missing in the initial comments was the Depression in 1929. What does that have to do with 1980s? In 1929, when Asheville and Buncombe County probably became the deepest in debt of any community in the nation, instead of declaring bankrupt and everybody not getting paid, a sinking fund was developed, and every year until 1976, the city of Asheville was paying approximately $1 million to pay off the bankruptcy of the 20s. Another problem, and it continues to be a problem if anybody here is a state legislator, is I've always said most communities didn't have the problem in the state that Asheville did. Our legislators could count. There were more people living outside the city than inside the city. So if they wanted to get elected, they didn't do what the city of residents might have needed and wanted. So the city of Asheville had been placed on a 5-year moratorium. 50-year moratorium did not end until 1977 or somewhere around in there. Was it 80? So a whole discussion needs to be done on understanding why annexation is important to city residents. That is a whole new forum in itself. But because of lack of growth, lack of having to pay, we had a city that was in financial problems. We had police cars that were obsolete. They might break down when it was inconvenient. We had a water system that was leaking, partly because some of the money from the water system had to be helped pay for the debt. We had a police and fire department that had on the city retirement system. Excuse me. Therefore, the widows the cost of living could not be increased. Therefore, the widows were receiving a pension that was truly shameful. To raise taxes to meet those needs would have been also a concern. All you had to do was simply move a little bit away and be out of the city and not have to pay the taxes. So the revitalization committee that had been mentioned started in the late 70s and came up with lots of ideas. Unfortunately, and to some degree fortunately, this project came to light. Simply take the property that was devalued, make it more profitable, make it more valuable, assisted all the taxpayers of the city of Asheville. And I will say I did support it, but I will also say I'm glad it didn't succeed for two reasons. One, it brought the people together, as has been mentioned, forward thinking, forward unity. We had an Asheville plan, a 2010 plan. Wayne was involved with that, looking forward, and I think today we can be thankful that those buildings have been restored in many ways and is a much more welcoming and lovely and place to live and visit. And a lot of people are coming to visit, and unfortunately, sometimes I wonder why they're staying, because you can't get around as fast as you can. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you.
Just a little sidebar to her comments. The state legislature did impose a 50-year moratorium on the annexation in the city of Asheville. And I guess, as you can tell, everybody moved into the county. And the Asheville City school system, the boundaries are the same as the city of Asheville limits in 1930. That's why we have 7 county schools in the city of Asheville today. So, but again, the population of Asheville in 1930 and 1980 increased very slightly until the moratorium was over and we could annex the properties. And every annexation since 1980 had gone all the way to the state Supreme Court. But only one, and that's Biltmore Lake, is the only one that succeeded in getting the city told to back off. So that's an interesting little sidebar there. And another important thing is that the citizens in the city of Asheville with this debt, now they never declared bankruptcy, they kept refinancing. So it was paid off in '76. But the citizens of Asheville in the early 30s, during the Depression, voted in a special school tax, which is on the books still today, because public education was important to the city of Asheville in the 30s during the Depression, and it still is.
Yeah, first, let me say thank you, Larry, and thank you so much, Norma. I haven't seen Norma since probably the 80s. And I think that you shed an incredible amount of light on this whole issue of what the city was going through and what the challenges that a lot of us never really knew or never thought about. And thank you so much for adding that. Wayne wants to add one more little sidebar, and then what's going to happen is we're going to take a very quick little break while Peggy shows some slides, or after which Peggy will show some slides. Then we're going to have a little back and forth talk for maybe 5 minutes, back and forth to question each other. And then we'll open questions to you all. But Wayne?
I was just going to follow Larry's comment with about the 50-year moratorium and the paying back of this enormous depression debt. That's one reason we have all this wonderful stock of buildings in downtown Asheville, because we couldn't get urban renewal money to tear the damn things down in the 60s. So there you go.
It's really great to see everybody here tonight. Can you hear me back in the back? No? Yes? Okay. I have a lot of great memories of the rap, but I could talk about it for hours, but I'm going to try to talk about it for minutes. You know, for years, no one ever really asked me much about it, but I would see my fellow rappers around town, and we'd kind of give each other the thumbs wrap up or the high rap five. I don't high five very well, but I'd like them to stand up right now. I know a lot of people are here. So if you remember, if you were in the rap or not, I want to thank some people specifically that helped me a whole lot. John Quigley was sort of my foreman. He had a truck. He helped me move things around and measure the downtown and all kinds of assorted things, and he's standing in the back. Ann Martin volunteered to be a photographer and do the color slides, and Jeff Davis was my black and white photographer. A lot of volunteers that just appeared out of nowhere. I mean, there were all these graphic designers who made posters and stickers and buttons, and I just could never thank everybody enough, and I don't even know who all was there. So if you were there and you remember that you were there, tell the North Carolina room. Maybe. I did find just recently some documents about the rap, and I'm showing a map I made. The way I got this done was through the help of my friends, and you'll see some of their names on there, and my family members who are here tonight too. So lately, people have been asking me questions about it, and the first one to come to interview me was a child from Evergreen Charter School, and I was very honored, and she thought I was a local hero, and so thank you. After that, we've had some more formal interviews, and there's been some books written recently. Marla Milling has a book for sale back there, maybe you can buy one, and has a great chapter about Save Downtown Asheville and the rap. And there's been another book put out by Marilyn Ball, and it just seems to be a popular topic all of a sudden. So things I get asked the most are, why did you do it? How did you do it? And now what do you think about the downtown? So the why was pretty simple. I heard about the meetings that were going on that Wayne mentioned before. And somebody told me, you better get down there. You're not going to believe what they're talking about. So I went to a meeting above Wayne's furniture store and slowly realized that the buildings they were talking about were ones that were really dear to my heart. And I grew up here, and my favorite restaurant, the Mediterranean, they were talking about. They were talking about my hardware store, and it wasn't just the things that I had been going to all my life, but it was also some things that were new and happening that I was starting to be involved with. I was getting ready to graduate from college, and I was going to work at Iris Photographics, and it was on Walnut Street for Ralph and Bridget Burns. John Reed was a friend of mine, and he was working on Lexington Park, and we all met down there and had beers, and you know, it was a place we lived, and it was vibrant to us, even if other people thought it was falling down. But when I got to the meeting and Wayne talked more and more about these buildings, I just got increasingly alarmed, and at some point I realized that the buildings included where my grandfather's shoe hospital had been. That was like 18 and 20 North Lexington Avenue, now known as the Moonshine Cafe, which I think seems pretty appropriate. My grandfather might have had some moonshine in the back, I'm not sure. And around the street was my father's shoe store on College Street. And when I was a child, I would stand in the window and watch the Christmas parade go by. And I just had this like visceral, I raised my hand and I said, you know, I think if everybody knew which buildings you were talking about, that they would be pretty upset, and you need to show them in some visual fashion. And I was a photographer. And so Wayne just lowered his glasses and looked at me and said, could you take care of that for us? And I just nodded my head. And of course, I didn't have any idea what I was going to do. And I think I just left the meeting and went to my mother's house, where I would always get a good meal. And I was trying to get some ideas, and at one point I just, I said, well, I wish I could just wrap the whole damn thing. And I was very enamored by Christo, who was an artist I was studying, and I thought his projects were, had a really heavy impact. And I just said it off the top of my head, but my sister must have been there, and I think she probably said, well, I can get you the cloth. And she worked for the Schlossman Corporation. And so the next day I called Benson Schlossman and, nervously said, could you give me a lot of cloth? And he said, the Schlossman Corporation recycled materials. They had a place down on the river. It was a big, big industry. And he said, well, how much do you need? And I said, well, I don't know. So I got my Volkswagen and drove around and looked at the odometer, and then I called Benson back and I said, I think I need about 2 miles of cloth. I just thought that would be the end of it. But he said, okay, when do you need it? And I said, in about 2 weeks. And, and then I picked a date. Turned out to be one of my good friend's birthdays, Levita. I don't think she was in town, or she doesn't remember. And then things just started rolling. It took a life of its own after that point. And I realized I needed a good map of what I was talking about. And I went to the library, and they said, well, we haven't really seen any drawings. We'd love to see them. If you can get your hands on any, bring them over here. We'll put them on display. And so I made an appointment at the city planning office with the director, and they squeezed me in around lunchtime, and I went over there, and the woman that was at the desk said, you might want to just wait in the office. He's not here right now, but it's more comfortable in there. So I went in, and there were plans very far along, spread out all over the room. So I just stood near one of them and put my hand on it, and I was very frightened. And when it came back in, I said, I'm here from the library, and I need a copy of these plans to display. And he said, okay, and he gave them to me. So then I was able to draw this little map, well, without all the names on it, and I figured out exactly how big of an area, what was involved. John and I went downtown one Sunday morning and measured each block exactly so we'd know how big it was. I had to go to the police department to get a permit, and they said, well, they weren't going to give it to me because they sensed that it was a protest. And so I quickly morphed the project into an educational event. And they gave me the permit, but they said we could not cross any roads. So we went and measured each little block, and we knew exactly how we were going to cut this roll of cloth that Benson was going to provide for us, and I thought it'd be fairly simple. Told all my friends and family to be down there at 2:30 on Saturday, and it was a beautiful April day. The night before, Benson called and he said, I'm really sorry, but I can't get the roll. I can give it to you in 4x5 sheets. Do you still want it? And he said, and one side is printed, it has advertisement on it. And I had a meltdown, and I had this vision of what I wanted it to look like. So I said, I can take it if you give me twice as much. And because he said one side was solid white. So that night it arrived, jumped through John's truck to the place he lived, which fortunately had a basement that had a lot of tables. And it came in bags like this, and we took it out of the bags and laid it flat on the table. And then all night long, we tied the pieces together so that just the white side showed on the outside to fit my art vision. And the next day, I stayed up all night long. The next day, we took them downtown and we put them in the right places for the block captains. And I know some of my block captains are here, so thank you very much for that. Then, there was a lot of waiting. And this is my friend David Hickerson. We did not have cell phones then. We did not, it was a pretty big area. I was down near 240. I had no idea what was going on. And slowly we kind of passed the word around. I had given each person a piece of paper with a number on it so you could say, I'm 14, are you 13, and you could figure out where to stand. More waiting across the street, Deborah Austin, Rob Pulleyn. Rob was in front of his building he was renovating. It was beautiful. The next slide makes me a little sad. I wish Bob Hall could be here. He passed away recently. Here he is with his family. I don't know if any of his family is here, but this man stuck his head out pretty far. He worked for one of the local banks who was pretty involved in supporting the mall, and he let me know, or as one of his sons let me know, it's like, this is pretty risky for my dad, but he really loves this town and he doesn't want to see this happen. So he came there. Next, we got the word that we were ready to go, and all this happened within a half an hour, so it's hard to even imagine. This is my friend Ed Cable, and he ran the whole 2 miles and handed it off to each person. He sent his regards. He couldn't be here tonight. And people just stood in place. This is Stephen Lurie in front of Sluter's Furniture. And I took these pictures. At some point, somebody, I think it was John, said, get in the truck, you can take some pictures. And they drove me around, and I saw everybody holding the cloth, and that's one of my favorite memories ever. Here are some people, I think that's Richard Thornton and Mary Alm, is that what we thought? Everyone's so young here, we're not sure who. My sister, Diana, thank you. That was my brother-in-law, Frank. And each person, they gathered all their section, and there were a lot of people there I did not know. I have no idea who this young lady was. I hope she's here. Now here's a subcult of the rap. Just this week, I've talked to 2 good friends who said, I always wished I had been at the rap. And I said, well, I have a picture of you at the rap. Here's Jerry Taylor. Rachel Stein wearing her little backpack here. She was actually a block captain, but couldn't remember being there. Here's my friend Roger Darrow. And if you look carefully, right across the street, we did have fresh vegetables, curb market. And then I realized yesterday, this is my mom standing up on the corner. I don't know who she's talking to, but she always had a good time. That's the how we did it. It just fell in place through the help of lots of people. And the now, when people ask me, well, what do you think about the downtown now? I love it. I'm a little intimidated by it. It's not as friendly to me as it was because I knew all the shop owners at this time. And if you went to somebody's place more than 3 times, they would get to know you. And it was just more intimate. But I think it's vibrant and wonderful. And I hope that it is okay. I do worry about it. When I worked in the planning office recently, most people think the downtown is very protected, but it's not as protected as we think. It is a National Register district, but that's an honorary title. If you want to build a building downtown or change one significantly, you have to go through a design review process, which is mandatory, but compliance is voluntary. And these things worry me because I realized at the planning office that the people working there are under similar pressures that they must have been in 1980. It's like, let's make sure the tax base is okay. Let's make sure we don't step on any developers' feet. We don't want to run anyone off. I know that the Preservation Society, Jack Thompson, is helping individual buildings get easements that will protect them, and they did 3 last December so that those buildings in the downtown area are protected. But there are a lot of buildings downtown, and if something major was to happen, I hope the climate doesn't change in that direction, but it does worry me a little bit. and I would like to see the protections be solidified for downtown. So talk to your city council members, talk to the people on planning and zoning and the Historic Resources Commission and say, you know, let's look at our neighborhoods, let's look at what we have and make sure we know what we want to preserve. I do want to close with some historical perspective. This event and all these events are to encourage people to give their living history documents they might have, your photographs, your business records, to the North Carolina Room. They take really excellent care of things. And I've donated my negatives and the ones Jeff Davis gave his, and John says he's looking for some. You know, we think more, Ralph Burns told me he took some pictures. So more things might turn up, and if you want to know more about the rep, you know, do visit the North Carolina Room. It's pretty amazing. But I mainly want to put my project in a little bit of historical perspective. And here's a picture of me. I was a little puppy, and my project lasted for 2 weeks, and there were around 200 people involved. And it lasted for 15 to 30 minutes. I mean, it took me 2 weeks to arrange, and then 30 minutes to actually do, and we all had a great time, the people that were there. And we got some attention, we got some media attention. The following day we were on the front page of the newspaper. But I would like to say that compared to these puppies, I don't know. They worked like in the trenches or in the rattlesnake den, as Wayne used to call it, for, you know, over 2 years, and I just think the difference is something I want everybody to remember. So help me give them a big hand.